Hi everybody, my name's Bob Saunders and I'm back again with another little video to try and help you if I can, if you're interested in spirituality, or indeed if you're interested in what happens when you die. Because in case you don't know me, I'm a trained medium, as is my wife, and we sort of work together on this, what we want to say here. And we've been for many years working with a group of spiritual beings called the Great White Brotherhood, and thanks to them we've been able to explore some of the spiritual realms, perhaps not all of them, but some of the spiritual realms where people go when they die, or where trained people can go when they've learnt to develop their auras to the point where they can enter those realms. It's the same area. Now, generally happens if somebody dies, they go down a long tunnel and they see a big bright light at the end, and they come out the other end, and they may well be greeted by somebody who appears extremely bright to them, and they think quite often that that person is either God or Jesus or whatever according to their religion. It's not. Already God doesn't exist as a person. God is a strange force that nobody seems to know very much about, but nevertheless God exists, and God is at the base. God is the creator of everything that exists. Now, but he can't appear as a person, so if you see somebody, you're not seeing God. Now, equally, I think you'll find that Jesus is so far ahead of us all that you may think the person that you're talking to is Jesus, but I don't think so. It's a guide, and they often appear extremely bright to our eyes because they are so pure compared to us that in the spiritual realms, purity equals light, and impurity, evilness, equals darkness. Now, so whether you see somebody or not, the point I'm coming to is that I would like to explain a little bit about where most people end up as a first stopping post after they die. They end up usually quite often in this beautiful park-like area. It's known in the spiritualist movement as the summer land. Now, it is most wonderful. It's like an enormous park, but there's no barriers. It doesn't end. It goes on forever. There are beautiful trees and flowers. It's all beautifully kept. There's grass everywhere, and there are lakes and all sorts of. It's really a lovely place. It's beautifully bright and sunny, and it's nice and warm, but not hot, because actually in the etheric realms heat and cold have no real meaning in terms of actual temperature, Fahrenheit or centigrade, but there's a spiritual warmth to it that you feel. And then depending on the personality that you've got, you may see different things. Now, I was speaking to my wife about this a few minutes ago, about what she sees when she goes into the summer land, and she often sees children playing with wild animals, lions and tigers and things, which I think you'll find is written in the Bible, that people can do that sort of thing. Well, I personally have not seen that, because my personality is different. Therefore, what I see is coloured by my personality. However, I do obviously see people as she sees people, and I see all the beautiful flowers and all the rest of it. My wife sees slightly other things. Now, And that's where you generally will find that you will go when you first enter the spiritual realms. Now, there are many other areas, and I haven't got time to talk about all of them, but something that's quite interesting is the hospital areas. Now, some people who have died of a traumatic accident or have been very ill, when they get over to the other side, they will find that they are not strong enough to take an active role in the life there straight away. So they go off to a hospital area. Now, what I've seen in conjunction with my guides is at least one, if not more than one, huge buildings. It's not really buildings. If you could imagine like an enormous greenhouse, but all made of glass and crystal and an enormous thing. And in it are beds, all laid one after the other, and on all of these beds there are people lying asleep, and round each bed is a spiritual being that are, in what I've seen at least, they've been holding their hands out like this over the people, the individuals concerned that are unconscious or asleep on the beds, and they're pouring coloured light from their hands onto those beings. And that's repeated on every bed. There's at least 1 or 2 or 3 guides, helpers, healers, whatever you like to call them, round each bed. And at the very end is a strange platform device I saw. That's like a platform here, a platform above it but slightly behind it, and yet a third one, I think. And sitting on chairs on these platforms are once again a number of people who are sitting holding their hands out like this, and once again coloured light is flooding out of their hands to help the healing process of all these people that need help, need healing. Okay, that's another thing we saw. Now, I've got some notes here, so I'm going to go back and quickly look at it. Now, I'm not going to bother you too much with the spiritual. Well, I'll just mention one other thing, because it was slightly ironic, I found it a little bit offensive, to be honest, but I'll tell you about it. Excuse me, when I first started to contact the White Brotherhood, the very first person who contacted me presented himself as a Native American. We used to call them in those days Red Indians, but nowadays we say Native American. And he presented himself as a gentleman who he called himself White Feather. And he looked a typical Native American with a magnificent headdress and all the rest of it. And much later on, I was in the spirit realms with my guides, and I entered this magnificent marble palace. You know, sometimes when you see those films with Charlton Heston in of a Greek thing, and there's people with white robes, and you know what I mean, marble, there's great big marble pillars and all that. Well, it looked a bit like that. And sitting in a huge alcove a little way off were 3 big thrones with 3 people dressed in white sitting on them. And I approached them, and the person in the middle started to speak to me, and I recognised his voice. And I said to him, "Hold on, you're the person who presents himself to me as White Feather, as a Native American." He said, "Yes." So I said, "But you're not really a Native American, you're some sort of being as I see you sitting here." He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, why did you present yourself to me as a Native American?" And he said, "Well," and I'm going back to the very early 80s, 1980s in that time, and it was the fashion when you got involved with spirituality, with mediumship, etc., to have what was called a Red Indian guide at the time. And he said, well, I thought you'd be flattered to have a Red Indian guide, a Native American guide. And I said, well, actually, I'm quite offended, because I'd have much preferred you to present yourself to me as you really are, rather than was I so naive at that time that I had to have a Red Indian guide. I was quite offended about it, actually. Anyway, that's the end of that little story. Now, I'm going to take you down to the more somber areas, the more negative areas, okay? Now, there are many layers. Just as there's many layers of the light, there's many layers of the lower realms. And my wife was saying that she has been in an area that's not particularly evil, it's not particularly horrible, but it is a cold grey area where people are just sitting about on the floor, looking lost and lonely, and there's an ambience, a feeling of, now how did she describe it? Right, she said that this area was for people who hadn't realised that they were yet dead, and they go apparently to this area. I haven't personally seen this, but if she's seen it, I believe her. They were just, oh no, sorry, no, what, the people who didn't know they were dead, they were in an area where they were just sitting on the grass, etc. I'm reading this as I'm talking to you, with guides advising them that they had, very gently advising them that they had died and had moved to heaven, spirit realms, whatever you call it. And also some of them had their relatives that had gone on before that were around them, also trying to advise them. Okay, now I got confused with another thing. Now, this lower realm that my wife had seen was dark, and not dark, dismal and grey, and there were all these people sitting about, no furniture or anything, just this sort of area. And she said that they were very unhappy. The unhappy lives that they'd led, the slightly evil lives that they'd led on earth, had gone with them, and that unhappiness that they'd created, they were recreating for themselves, and they were moaning and groaning, and they were covered in what she said looked like mud mixed with sump oil. You know, sump oil, thick oil from dirty oil from an engine that's been emptied out the engine, and mix that with mud and smear that on people. That's what they had on them, that they were trying to pull off, but they couldn't. Presumably that is the manifestation of their dismal and evil thoughts and so on, I suppose. Okay, now I'll very quickly go on from there. Oh, incidentally, there was also, she said, guides coming to them and trying to help them, trying to persuade them that they didn't have to stay there, that if they repented and thought about the evil they'd done and were sorry, they could move on to a better area. Okay, now incidentally, before I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've seen. Incidentally, this hell that people talk about, this burning abyss, I've never seen, and my wife has never seen it. Now, I'm a bit mystified where this idea comes from. Maybe it does exist somewhere, but I've been for a number of years round and round these different areas, and honestly, all I've ever seen, it gets darker and darker and more dismal and cold and horrible and black. But I've never seen it suddenly, you come to an area where there's burning fire and imps and torturing. I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it exists. I'm not denying that people see it. When people, have these near-death experiences and go off and say that they see these areas, I don't think they're lying, they're seeing something, but I personally have never seen it, and neither has my wife. Now, I'd like to talk about a gentleman that I was asked to go and have a talk with once. My guides took me off to an area, and the land was completely barren and grey, a bit like the surface of the moon, if you can imagine, and the light was quite grey and not very nice. It was a dull, horrible, dismal light, and sitting in this area was a little wooden hut, and I knocked on the door and opened it, and sitting in a far corner, leaning against a corner of the hut, was a person, a man. And he looked up, and I said, you know, hello, what are you doing here, sort of thing, because my guys didn't tell me too much before I got there, so I was a bit mystified. And he started to talk to me, and I said, well, tell me about yourself when you were on. He knew that he died, but he couldn't understand why he was stuck all on his own in this particular area. And I said to him, well, tell me about your life. What sort of life did you lead on earth? And he said, well, I was someone who kept himself to himself. I never mixed with people. I didn't like mixing with people. I just wanted to be on my own all the time. Well, now, from that, you can see that he'd taken with him that loneliness, and he found himself in an area that was a reflection of how he'd lived and his mental state, if you like. And I said to him, but don't sort of angelic people come and see you from time to time, so that they can help you move on from that area? He said, yes, he said, but I tell them to go away, he said, because they're so bright, they frighten me. He said, and he went on, but you're not so bright, you don't frighten me because you don't glow as much as they do. And I thought, thanks very much. Anyway, we chatted for a bit, and I told him that he didn't have to stay there. All he had to do was sort of think about whether it was right for him to stay isolated from other people, or whether it would be better for him to go off and meet other people, and he would be helped to go off into the true spiritual realms and progress through the layers of light. And with that I left him, and I was never taken back there again. So what happened to him, I don't know. I hope he managed to move on. I'll just quickly look at my notes again. Now, I'm going to tell you, as a last thing, about a horrible area that I went to. Now, I'm talking about the very early 1980s. And I mention that because if you've ever seen the Harry Potter film, where Harry Potter and Dumbledore go into a big cave to try and get a Horcrux that's in a bowl in the middle of a little island, and all these creatures come out of the water to try and attack them. Well, this looked very similar to the area I was in, looked similar to that, except obviously I saw this 30 years before J.K. Rowling thought of writing it in something similar in a book. Whether she ever did astral travel and saw things, I don't know. But anyway, I was taken into this area that was very dark and dismal, like a huge cave. There was this big lake full of dark water, and it was writhing with people. There was people in this water battling with each other. They're pushing each other under the water to try and get out of the water. Now, we were standing, my guide and I, just slightly behind a rock, a slimy black rock, and people were trying to climb onto this rock. And as they climbed, and they would sit down and say, oh, thank goodness I'm out of that horrible water, I'm on the rock, somebody would grab hold of them and pull them back in the water to try and take their place. And it was horrible, and it was never ceasing. It just went on and on and on. And I stood there and looked with my mouth open. I couldn't believe this was happening. And I thought, my goodness, I wouldn't like to end up here. Now, what you have to do to end up there, I don't know. But it was really very, very unpleasant. Now, I'm going to stop there. Well, I've shown you a little, well, talked about a little bit of some of the areas of heaven and hell. Most of us, I just repeat, most of us go off to this thing they call the Summerland, this beautiful park area. And people stay there for a long, long time if they wish. They can move up to the higher realms, and they can move down to the lower realms if they want. I think that's inhabited mostly by people that come from Earth and have done evil things during their lives. Okay, one warning before I stop. If you're interested in learning how to enter that realm, please, please, please do not do it without proper training and proper assistance, and you will be ultimately, if you work with proper mediums who know what they're doing, you will ultimately develop to the point where a guide of some sort will come and help you. Don't open your mind into the astral realms and say, please come and take me up. You'll go wrong if you do that. I've mentioned it 2 or 3 times in other videos. I repeat it again. It's very, very dangerous. Psychic work can be dangerous. You need to be properly trained and have proper protection around you. Okay? Namaste.